Mr. Clerk has advised me that we have a quorum and we are ready to start. So I will call the meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 42 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Human Resources, Skills, Social Development, and the Status of Persons with Disabilities. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to House Order of June 23, 2022. Members attending in person and members attending remotely using the Zoom application. To ensure an orderly meeting, I would ask you before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. For those participating virtually, please use your raised hand function. Before speaking, click on the microphone icon to activate your own mic. When you're done speaking, please put your mic on mute to minimize interference. For those in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. Your microphone will be controlled by the Proceedings and Verification Officer. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order, and we appreciate your patience and understanding. You may speak in the official language of your choice. Interpretation services are available by choosing either English or French if you're attending remotely. I would also advise, unless exceptional circumstances, I will only recognize those appearing virtually if they have an approved House of Commons headset. I would also remind that screenshots are prohibited when the meeting is in session. And should any technical issues arise, please advise me and we'll suspend for a few minutes to ensure that everyone may participate fully. Bill C-22, an act to reduce poverty and to support the financial security of persons with disabilities by establishing the Canada Disability Benefit and making a consequential amendment to the Income Tax Act. Pursuant to order of reference of Tuesday, October the 18th, 2022, the committee will resume its study of Bill C-22, an act to reduce poverty and support the financial security of persons with disabilities by establishing the Canada Disability Benefit and making the consequential amendment to the Income Tax Act. I would like to take a moment to remind those participating in today's meeting, as well as those observing the proceedings in person on video, that the committee adopted a motion on Monday, October the 24th, 2022, that included instructions for the clerk to explore options to allow for the participation of all witnesses and members of the public in the context of the consideration of Bill C-22. In planning inclusive and accessible meetings, the committee has made arrangements for sign language interpretation in both American Sign Language and Quebec Sign Language for those witnesses appearing in person and by Zoom, and for those individuals in our audience. The sign language interpreters are being video recorded to be incorporated into a video recording of the proceedings today, and that will be made available at a later date on Parleview via the committee's website. To assist the interpreters in their work, I kindly ask all members and witnesses appearing today to introduce themselves when speaking. When I recognize you, before you begin, if you would introduce yourself, and to speak slowly. Finally, if a member of the audience requires assistance at any time, please notify a member of the staff or the committee clerk. I would like to inform all members that the witnesses appearing virtually today have completed the technical test to check their connectivity and equipment. I would like to welcome our witness to begin our discussions with 5 minutes of opening remarks by questions. We will begin with Indwell Community Homes, Jeffrey Nevin, Chief Executive Officer. Verena Gary Gladstone, Head of Stakeholder Relations. We have an individual appearing, Vincent Calderhead, Legal Counsel, but he has not. We have not been able to connect with him at this time. So I will start with 5 minutes to Jeffrey Nevin, Chief Executive Officer of Indwell Community Homes. Mr. Nevin, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you mentioned, my name is Jeff Nevin, and I'm the CEO at Indwell. Indwell is a Christian charity that creates affordable housing communities that support people seeking health, wellness, and belonging. And our three core values are dignity, love, and hope. We serve more than 1,200 people with housing and support programs in southwestern and southern Ontario. And these include places like Hamilton, London, Kitchener-Waterloo, and smaller communities like Woodstock in Norfolk County and St. Thomas. 1 in 5 people in Canada live with a disability, and over 1 million Canadians with disabilities live in poverty. As a leading provider of supportive, affordable housing for people with disabilities, Indwell walks alongside many vulnerable Canadians whose income bears no resemblance to the actual costs of living. In Ontario, for example, the current housing allowance for a person receiving the Ontario Disability Support Benefit is $522 per month. The complete disconnection between the provided housing allowance and the actual cost of housing has produced homelessness, an impossible demand for specialized housing, and oversubscription of every housing subsidy program. Indwell supports the immediate introduction of the Canadian Disability Benefit Act as a vital tool to promote the choice and dignity of Canadians with disabilities. We firmly believe that every Canadian deserves the opportunity to access quality housing of their choice. When Canadians have enough income to access the necessities of living, it creates a pathway for recovery and independence. Adequate income support that matches the cost of living increases opportunities for people with disabilities to make real choices about where they live. As a supportive housing provider, we also recognize that chronically low disability benefits contribute to increased costs of providing quality, deeply affordable housing and supports. Currently, in Ontario, people with disabilities can only cover a small portion of the actual costs of their housing, requiring reliance on limited subsidy programs and resources. In terms of housing development, it severely impacts the ability of any developer to create a suitable and sustainable business case for housing geared to people with disabilities. When people have the opportunity to purchase their housing from the market, it will fuel the construction of new affordable housing stock by both the nonprofit and the for-profit sectors. We strongly support the Canadian Disability Benefit Act as a high-impact opportunity to change the lives of people with disabilities in Canada. We strongly encourage the government and all members of Parliament to act and implement this program. We believe the impact of this program will be significant if the benefit amount is in keeping with the actual costs of the necessities of life, that the program functions as a direct increase in income with no provisions for clawbacks from any provincial income programs, that housing allowance programs are indexed to current available market rents, that individuals receiving the benefit are empowered to use their income freely, that implementation of the program does not replace existing housing subsidy programs. In conclusion, the Canadian Disability Benefit Act has the potential to transform the lives of those living with disabilities by pulling thousands out of poverty and affirming their human dignity. In addition, it will bring back the for-profit housing sector into providing housing solutions for thousands of Canadians. Thank you for the opportunity to speak into this important bill.
Thank you, Mr. Nevin. Now to Mr. Gladstone for up to 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. My name is Gary Gladstone, and I am the lead stakeholder relations of RENA, as well as the convener of the Intentional Community Consortium. RENA, celebrating our 50th anniversary next year, promotes dignity, individuality, independence, personal growth, and community inclusion for people with diverse abilities within a framework of Jewish culture and values. Open to all, RENA provides supportive housing, programming, and employment services to over 1,000 individuals with developmental disabilities, including autism, and those with mental health challenges. The Intentional Community Consortium represents 26 agencies that are advocating for and building not-for-profit, deeply affordable housing for the most vulnerable in society, those with developmental disabilities. RENA is the fourth largest developmental service provider in Ontario, currently operating 32 group homes, supporting an additional 140 individuals in supported independent living units, 252 community participants in our daily programming, with over 700 full and part-time employees with an overall budget of $57 million. On behalf of those we support with varied abilities, and specifically those with developmental disabilities and severe mental health challenges, I am pleased to be present to support Bill C-22, an act to reduce poverty and to support the financial security of persons with disabilities by establishing the Canada Disability Benefit and making a consequential amendment to the Income Tax Act with a request to get this legislation passed soonest with a tight timeline of 6 months to complete regulations. As I thank Minister Carla Qualtrough for bringing this important legislation forward, I would also like to thank all members and parties in the House for expediting this bill through the House to committee to have a fulsome discussion. About 100,000 Ontario adults have a developmental disability. 18 to 30% of those in homeless shelters have a developmental disability. 50% of those with developmental disabilities live with significant medical issues. 90% of those with developmental disabilities live below the poverty line and require deeply affordable rent for adequate housing with supports, about $522 in Ontario. Women with a developmental disability are 65% more likely to experience abuse than a typical female. Honored members of the committee, as I've spoken to you before, there is over a 40-year waiting list for housing with supports for those with developmental disabilities, although things are getting a bit better thanks to the targeted carve-out of the National Housing Strategy for this targeted vulnerable community. Bill C-22 is a vital piece of legislation that will impact the lives of those we support and those with disabilities from coast to coast to coast. We need to pass this legislation as soon as possible with all parties' support so that we can get working on the regulations immediately that will address critical issues about the design and structure of the benefit. I would urge that the following be in the regulations. 1, a safeguard against provincial territorial government clawbacks, as we want to ensure that there is a net benefit and that there will not be a clawback from the provinces for any additional funds provided by the federal government. 2, index for inflation. As inflation and increase in cost of living is on everyone's mind now, it's imperative that any benefit be indexed to the rate of inflation. And 3, we would also like to see representatives from the disabled community at the table when decisions are made with respect to Bill C-22, as well as all disability acts and regulations. It's imperative that we enact the bill and work on regulations immediately so that we can get the benefits out to the most vulnerable, those who need them now as soon as possible. RENA and the Intentional Community Consortium recommend that a deadline for the recommendations and actionable items be no more than 6 months. In preparation for this presentation, I've read briefs from many outstanding organizations in the disability sector. I'd like noted that RENA and the Intentional Community Consortium share some of the concerns of the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act Alliance and would like them addressed without slowing down the passage of this legislation where possible within 6 months, ensuring that the benefit gets out the door as soon as possible. A nation's greatness is measured by how it treats its weakest members, said Mahatma Gandhi. Through the proposed act, you can ensure that Canada takes care of those who cannot advocate for themselves. With your support, we need to ensure that those with developmental disabilities are never left behind again. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of Bill C-22 with the request that it be quickly passed into law with unanimous all parties support, with regulations brought forth within 6 months. For further information on RENA and the consortium, please visit our website, rena.org. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gladstone. We will now open the floor for committee members questioning, beginning with Ms. Gray for 6 minutes, please.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. I'll start with Mr. Gladstone from RENA. You had made the comments about a timeline, and I'm not sure if you had seen the testimony on Monday when we had the minister here, how we sort of laid out the timeline where it was stated, both by the minister and the officials, that it will likely take around 12 months to do regulations, and then, of course, implementation after that. So we could very well be into 2024. And I'm just wondering if you have thoughts on that and what difficulties you see with that type of timeline.
Well, thank you. So the first comment that I would make is I would encourage all members of the House across all parties to be as cooperative as possible to ensure that those with disabilities get the results that they need as soon as possible. We've indicated 6 months. I understand some things move quickly, some things don't move as quickly. Whatever can be done to expedite the process would be most appreciated. As I was joking this morning, we just got to get her done and make sure that those that require the funds have the funds. Thank you.
Thank you. The other thing I wanted to ask you about was clawbacks, because we know that in the legislation that there's no guarantee that clawbacks couldn't potentially happen, and I'm just wondering if you're concerned about potential clawbacks.
I am concerned, as I had indicated, and I'm certainly hoping that in the regulations that there will be mention, and that that will be enough to ensure that will be the case, and in the negotiations and the agreements with the provinces and territories.
Thank you. Now, I know that the government has mentioned that they've been doing consultations on this benefit, and we know that this legislation was tabled in the last Parliament, and then of course with the election it died, and then it was brought forth again. So I'm wondering if you could tell us what level of participation you've had on consultations to this point.
We have had many meetings with various ministers and MPs of all parties since this and the previous governments have been elected, indicating that there is a tremendous need for additional funds for those with disabilities, in our case, particularly developmental disabilities. So we have been speaking with many on this topic over the years across all party lines to very positive reception.
Great, thank you. Another concern that we've heard from organizations and through various media stories, as well as persons with disabilities with financial situations where they've made the really unfortunate decision to opt for medical assistance in dying, and we had some testimony on this even on Monday. And these situations highlight further the need for this type of support to get to individuals quickly and to do it right. And have you heard those types of concerns as well?
I've heard those types of concerns from many, and it's imperative. This is Canada. It's time that we take care of all of our citizens, especially and particularly those with disabilities, and this is an excellent vehicle to take that step, and I'm hoping, as I've indicated, that we can take that step and that financial concerns will no longer be an issue. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And I'd actually like to ask similar questions of Mr. Nevin as well. So maybe we'll go over to you, and I'll start off the top just with the timeline as well, with the timeline that we've heard of how long this could take and when this would actually be implemented. And I'm wondering if you could just speak to that and what concerns you have and what you think the gaps might mean to people that you work with.
Yeah, I would concur that we need to move this legislation forward. It's much needed, and I would just really encourage all members of Parliament to do whatever they can to move it forward. The reality is that in conversations just this week with a close friend who is on the edge of becoming homeless because he can't afford his rent due to his disability, and that's unfortunately happening to thousands of people across our country.
Thank you. And then I'll ask you as well, excuse me, just about the consultation that you've had with the government up to this point.
Yeah, we have reached out to members of Parliament as well as all levels of government to raise the issues that people living with permanent disabilities do not have adequate means to cover the basic necessities of life.
Well, I guess as part of that, when we're talking about outreach, it's, whether or not it's, sending some information in, but has there been any sort of format that you've been involved in, whether it's been a round table or, anything that's been more on a real consultative sort of point of view, looking for real specific recommendations and ideas?
Most of our consultation has been through the housing side of things. And of course, in the housing conversation, that directly is about people's income. And so deep appreciation for Minister Huson, who has had multiple roundtables in communities where we've been and continues to reach out to as recently as yesterday for me to hear about the implications of the lack of housing and the lack of income associated with that.
Right, but was that on C22 though, or was that on a separate sort of housing initiative?
Like I mentioned, our approach has been through a housing lens, and as part of that conversation, income is a really obviously a key driver in the cause of the housing side of things.
Thank you, Ms. Gray. Mr. Collins for 6 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thank you to both the witnesses for your attendance today and providing testimony. First, can I start with Mr. Nevin? Jeff, welcome to the committee. Jeff, I know that as a former city councillor and past president of City Housing Hamilton, I know that many of our tenants struggled over the years to cope with and purchase the necessities of life for those that are on ODSP and receive ODSP as a support payment. Can you briefly share with the committee what challenges your tenants would face currently with the disability support payment that they receive from the province of Ontario, and maybe expand upon the housing component as you referenced in your opening?
Yes, thank you, MP Collins. It is actually it's dire, and like I mentioned, our organization is focused on the approximately 7 million people that live south and southwest of Toronto, and that area there from Mississauga all the way down to Chatham, and across that region, a basic a windowless basement apartment is $1,500, and folks currently living with disabilities have a housing allowance of $522. So we have a gap of approximately $1,000 to hit the bottom, the cheapest of the market units available. And this is having an impact on people's health. It's having an impact on their mental health. It's having an impact on substance use, and it's also, in addition to the human impact, the lack of adequate income that folks with disabilities are living with means that they can't purchase what they need from the market. And so we're also seeing, as a housing developer and a healthcare provider, we're seeing that it's limiting the options of the private sector. When I started in this role 20 years ago, our folks were able to find housing at the bottom end of the market in the for-profit sector. There's now $1,000 gap to hit the bottom of that, and the implications are homelessness. The implications are poor health, and as been mentioned today, and in some cases, it's leading to death.
Thanks, Jeff, for that information. Mr. Gladstone referenced the percentage of those people who are disabled who find themselves in a shelter, and I think the stat that he gave was between 18 and 30%. I know a lot of your clients at one point in time, unfortunately, would find themselves living in an emergency shelter in Hamilton or other communities where you have units. Can you share with us, the situation as it relates to the disabled? You referenced your friend. Those people living with a disability who receive ODSP, who can't find accommodation, that basement apartment even, which is the cheapest one that's on the market. Can you share with us some of the stories for those individuals, some Indwell tenants who may have found their way through the shelter system because they're not receiving the appropriate income support today?
This is a daily story for us. Literally, in any given year, we have thousands of folks who are calling us in desperate situations. In our case, our primary area of expertise when it comes to supports is for those experiencing mental illness and addictions, and the impact of struggling with mental health and having inadequate financial supports it means that people who are calling us are in desperate situations. They are homeless, and Mr. Gladstone referenced how many folks are dealing with a developmental challenge in homeless shelters. And there are stats out there of as high as 80% with acquired brain injury. There's other stats around mental health. And what we're finding is that it's nearly everyone who is applying for our housing coming out of homelessness is experiencing mental health concerns, whether those are diagnosed or perhaps undiagnosed.
Thanks, Jeff. One last question. I think I probably have about a minute left. The minister was here earlier this week, and she was very clear that there would be no clawbacks with this, and she also talked about not substituting the benefit for existing payments that the provinces and territories might currently offer. You were very clear in your recommendations. How important is that for your community, that this be a supplemental payment, that it is an increase to what they receive today, and that it doesn't substitute, in our case, the ODSP payments that the province currently provides?
Yeah, it's essential that this benefit be in addition to what their folks are currently receiving as income, whether that be from the province or from other subsidy programs. If there's a clawback, that I think goes against the very intent of helping people to have more income to be able to purchase their basic necessities that they need.
You have 15 seconds.
I'm good, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Collins. Madame Chabot pour 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Madame Chabot for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all of you, all the witnesses, for your engagement and your work with the people with disabilities. My first question is for Mr. Nevin. During your remarks, you focused on the fact that there's a need for people to have income and income supports corresponding to the real cost of living and the necessities of life. Do you have an idea of what amount that would be? An amount that would be enough to meet and fulfill the necessities of life? I'm asking you because in the bill, that is something that would be decided through regulation or set through regulations. It's important to us as parliamentarians to understand what the witnesses mean when they say sufficient supports.
Thank you for that clarifying question. As I mentioned, in our area, in our geography of the area of southwestern and southern Ontario, that gap on the housing piece alone is about $1,000 currently. And so that is the biggest hurdle that forces people into homelessness when they can't pay their housing. But I would suggest that the income benefit required would need to be in the area of $1,000 per person per month, at minimum.
Merci. Thank you. My next question will be for Mr. Gladstone. You offer employability services for the people you are helping and people with disabilities. And as you know, the Canadian benefit should be, the Canadian disability benefit should be supplement to this, should be supplementary. Do you have an opinion to give us on what the mechanism should be surrounding the supplement and this benefit?
Well, thank you very much for recognizing the work that RENA does with our employment programs that have very good success rates for those we're able to assist. It's important, building on Mr. Nevin's comments, that this must be in addition to and not instead of. And I would look to it to encourage individuals to work where it's appropriate for the hours that is appropriate for them to be working with an income, as well as the Canada Disability Benefit. And together they should be in a position to get even further ahead, to get out of poverty, which is severe, and with 90% of those with developmental disabilities living below the poverty line is real and chronic. And with the supports both from the disability benefit and from the wages that they would be earning from the employment for the hours they would be able to work, or the jobs they would be able to work at, would make a difference.
Si je vous ai bien compris.
If I've understood correctly, therefore, we need to take into account the amount made through income, because through working, that is, because working is important and jobs are important, and the benefit should come and complete that amount. Is that right?
I think it's important that an individual with disabilities, and in this case, I'll mention specifically developmental disabilities, has the ability to both earn and have a benefit to ensure that they are not below and above the poverty line, and are able to live a decent life in a decent home with a decent future, and with the government in a position to assist through the Canada Disability Benefit, as well as the supports on the other hand from the employment programs.
Ma prochaine question.
My next question will be for both witnesses. As a parliamentarian who will be looking at this bill section by section, clause by clause, do you have any suggestions to give us on amendments that you would like to see in our bill, whether it's in terms of timeframes, the amount, the mechanisms, the framework? Do you have any recommendations for that?
I think it is important to, if we can clarify the minimum amount, I think that's going to really impact the potential benefits of this program. I would concur with Mr. Gladstone's witness relating to the urgency and the timelines required. So if an amendment could be made to increase the timeline to implement the bill, that would be important as well.
And from my perspective, again, it is important that the money get in the hands of those who require it as soon as possible, with all party support, which I'll stress a million times to make sure that that does in fact happen. If it doesn't delay, I'd like to see, again, as Mr. Nevin indicated, the minimum, the safeguard against clawbacks, the index for inflation, and not relating directly to the act itself, but ensuring, as discussions are being made, that representatives from the disabled community are present at the discussions. Thank you.
Madame Chabot. Committee members, before I go to Ms. Zarrillo, you will see Mr. Calderhead is now available. And if you agree, we need to do a quick sound check with him and allow him to do his statement, because he is a witness from that has been asked to be here. So could we just suspend for a couple of minutes while we do the sound check and bring him in before we go to Ms. Zarrillo? Ms. Zarrillo, you okay with that as well? Yeah, okay, committee? Okay, we'll suspend for a couple of moments then, and we'll go. If it's clear, then he'll make his opening statement, then we'll resume with Mr. Zarrillo. Thank you. this time. And the floor, Madame Cirillo, for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for all the witnesses and for Mr. Calderhead too for coming in today. I'm going to just reiterate what I've heard today around both of the witnesses mentioned this adequacy, this benefit keeping, ensuring that it secures the necessity of life for folks with no clawbacks. So as I'm sure you know, the majority of this disability benefit is being designed by regulation rather than actually in the bill. So my question, and I'm going to ask you first, Mr. Nevin, and then Mr. Gladstone, if you wouldn't mind, is, what do you feel the pros and cons are of putting this into regulation rather than securing it into the bill to have the adequacy, to have the no clawbacks? And I think you also mentioned a timeline secured in the bill. What do you think the risks or the pros and cons might be on that design choice?
We're moving into area that's not necessarily my area of expertise, but I'll just say that from my perspective, it seems that by putting it in the bill, it legislates these details and ensures that the minimum standards and such. However, if that were to slow down the process, then it's a balancing act of finding the best way forward while ensuring these particular pieces that have come out here today around the amount, the minimum amount, around the ensuring there's no clawback, ensuring that it's not impacted by inflation, ensuring that the amount provided is indexed to the actual cost of living. And so if I'm somewhat pragmatic on that, if the best way to get to those things is through legislation, let's do that. If the best way is through regulation, then let's do that.
Mr. Gladstone?
Thank you very much. So as well, I'm not an expert, but perhaps I know a bit more. Would be wonderful. Well, I guess the first comment that I would make is if it's in regulation or if it's in legislation, another government still has the opportunity to change it however they want, when they want, and how they want. At this point, as I indicated and stressed, and Mr. Nevin, if I can, from your comments you're joining, we need to get it done. We need to get this out in the hands of the individuals that we and others support in the disability community as soon as is possible. And from that which I understand, regulation at this point would be faster than many changes, but I've indicated what changes would need to be made. And the bottom line is if they can be done appropriately and quickly, that's most important.
Thank you, Mr. Gladstone and Mr. Nevin. And Mr. Gladstone, I wanted to touch on the gender lens, which you did approach around the the impact that this has on women. And we know that disproportionately the pay gap in general affects women, and there are many implications of income insecurity for women. So I wonder if you wouldn't mind, Mr. Gladstone, to just expand a little bit on why this is so important for women to have this this financial gap fixed, and how it could be transformational for women's lives, for women living with a disability.
Well, thank you. Safety, security, appropriate and safe housing is essential. It is at the core of everything that we do, and the majority of disability agencies do. Is good, secure, safe housing is vital, where you are not dependent on somebody else, that you can cover your own expenses, that you can live. I'll just reiterate a safe place 1,000 times over, because if you're not in a safe place, you can be taken advantage of in many ways. And as I indicated in my initial stats that you commented on, thank you, women with a developmental disability, 65% more likely to suffer abuse. And that's because of improper and inappropriate housing in the shelters, etc. If people through the benefit are able to afford a place to live. And again, I'll just reiterate, as those on the committee have heard me say time and time again, more money for housing, thank you very much, gives them a much better opportunity to have a full and fulfilling life without having to worry. And thank you.
Thank you. And I've heard from a number of women and women living with a disability that they're concerned that it'll be a household measurement, or that they won't have the autonomy that they deserve in Bill C-22. So do you see any space in Bill C-22 where their autonomy would be at risk, because it's not really written into the bill at this point in time?
Well, I would go back to the comments that I made, where individuals with disabilities and representing those with disabilities be around the table when all the regulations are being set, to ensure that things like that are in fact covered in the regulations and that there won't be those issues. So it's important that the right individuals are sitting around the table, and then the appropriate results that we all want will be there.
That's great. And this idea of co-creation has come up before in testimony here. And again, in C-22, we don't see it actually written into regulation that there needs to be a co-creation piece. So is that something that you would support, Mr. Gladstone, is to have an amendment that explicitly says that this needs to be jointly fashioned with the disability community? And Mr. Nevin, I'd ask you that same question.
So in terms of the phrase amendment, I'd be a little bit afraid that the time lag in order to get that, to make sure it's done right and done quickly, both. I'm not sure if an amendment is necessary or just the instructions back. Again, that's not my area of expertise, but I really think it's important that those with disabilities and those representing be around the table as the regulations are being drawn up and drafted.
Madame Zerillo, a bit over. Mr. Aitchison for 5 minutes, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I have a question. I'm going to start with Mr. Nevin, and I wanted to kind of focus more on the actual supply of housing specifically. Both your organizations obviously don't just operate facilities, or homes, you build them as well. Can you quantify for us the need, like the waiting list, maybe locally, regionally, nationally even, for homes?
Yeah, thank you for that question. The need is tremendous, and it's similar to the amount of folks who are living in poverty due to disability. And it comes as no shocker that when people only have a little over $500 to purchase something that costs $1,500 housing, that it leads to homelessness. So I can speak to by city, just give you a couple of anecdotes. In the city of Hamilton, where I reside, there is about 1,000 people that are living on the streets. There's a similar number in London, which is a slightly smaller city, and that's just two cities in our country here. What we're looking at is about, if you look at the ratios in that, you're somewhere between 1 and 250 and 1 to 500 in those cities where we're looking at homelessness, and some of that is and much of it, I should say, is due to inadequate income to be able to purchase the housing required.
Quickly then, if I can follow up on that, in terms of getting new homes built, new units built, I'm assuming that organizations like yours have to engage the assistance of something like the CMHC to make the numbers work. Is that true?
That is correct. It's incredibly difficult, even with the current programs that exist, because the ability for individuals to purchase their housing is so very low. So even with those capital support programs, currently it's nearly impossible to create deeply affordable housing in the range of $500 a month rent, which is the current housing benefit that people in Ontario receive.
Right.
So,
Can I give you an example of a situation that exists in Muskoka? Community Living South Muskoka is obviously a pretty important organization in our community. They actually owned a piece of land, got all the municipal approvals done, everything was ready to go. And when they finally got through all that painful process, having been a former mayor, I know how painful municipalities can be. When they finally started dealing with the CMHC, that's when they gave up and they sold the land. They couldn't. It was like it was straitjacket. I'm wondering if you could speak, if you've had enough experience dealing with the CMHC, if there's anything that we should be focusing on here to improve the process. I mean, I know that they're all well-meaning and want to help, but it sounds like there's been an awful lot of circumstances where they can't get the money out the door for, because we can't tick every box. What would you suggest any things we could do to make the CMHC work faster, better?
I think that's for another committee perhaps, but what I will say is that this benefit, if implemented, would work hand in hand with the National Housing Strategy and actually make that strategy much more effective. And for folks like community living that you mentioned, the numbers would work. And I spoke to that in my remarks around that currently the cost of construction, the cost of land, the various challenges that are in front of us in order to create deeply affordable housing are large, and they're too big. And the challenge that comes back consistently is it's nearly impossible to actually find enough programs at the federal, provincial, municipal level to actually make it work when people have such inadequate income to be able to purchase their housing. And so I think with this benefit, groups like the ones you mentioned will actually find success when they're working out the numbers with groups like CMHC. As
Mr. Nevin, I'm running out of time. Can I quickly follow up and just say to you that I think you're right. They do have to work hand in hand, and so I think it is actually a conversation we need to have. And if possible, I'd like to follow up with you because we're looking for ways to make it work better. And so if offline we can talk about it some more. They do have to work together, and it sounds like they're not right now, because everyone does agree, I think, around this committee and in the Parliament that this benefit is important. We need to get it done. We need to get it done as quickly as possible, but we got a lot of work to do on the other side to get supply up, and that's one of the areas we could use your help.
Let me tell you this. We've created 330 deeply affordable units this year. If this benefit comes into being, we can up that by at least double in subsequent years, maybe even triple of that, because the sustainability will work.
And then in terms of your question of the need, as you're well aware...
Excuse me, Mr. Gladstone. Okay. You may want to interject with another question there. Thank you, Mr. Aitchison. Mr. Coteau, for 5 minutes, please.
Gary, if you want to finish what you were saying.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I was just going to indicate that housing for those with developmental disabilities is approximately a 40-year waiting list. In York Region alone, there are currently 640 individuals in residential service with supports, and in need are another 1,914. And in the city of Toronto, there are approximately 1,860 in residential service, and in need is another 5,616. But there were 4,825 unique individuals waiting for permanent supports living in Toronto as of March 31st. Some were waiting for multiple different resources. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Gladstone. And I want to thank both of you for being here today and providing us with so much information. Mr. Nevin, you said something very interesting at the very beginning. You talked about choice and dignity and recovery and independence. And, we forget about the recovery and independence piece often. This is about building someone up so that they can be independent, that they can, chart their own course. And I just want to say thank you for, for bringing that message here to this committee, because the world's changed. Over the last few years, we've seen, of course, the impact and, of the pandemic, both fiscally and in many cases, it's impacted many Canadians from a mental health standpoint. But we see the economy changing rapidly, and people just facing more and more challenges. And, that message that we keep hearing, and it's not only from the two of you today, but it's been from other witnesses, that we need to do this as quickly as possible. Is it because of the way in which the challenges that people are presenting, there's more pressure coming? Is it because of the long-term piece, the long-term history of this specific file? And do you believe that if we can, like the minister suggested, take that framework by putting in regulations to get this done with people from the community involved in the process? So doing it together, is this the best route possible to get it done to take on some of those challenges that we're facing? Either of you can answer.
Well, I would say it's absolutely the right way, and we need to move it forward. And the individuals need the benefit in order to have the dignity, in order to make the right choices, in order to lead proper and fulfilling lives. Those with all disabilities, again, speaking on behalf of those with developmental disabilities, absolutely.
Yeah. Mr. Nevin?
Let me just humanize this conversation with a conversation from yesterday with my friend, where he realizes that this month he wasn't able to pay insurance on his car that he needs to use to get to work that he's currently on a leave from. And he recognizes that having his car parked on the street uninsured will likely get it towed, and then he will lose the ability to have his car, and the likelihood of being able to return from his leave back to work becomes smaller and smaller. He's about to lose his housing, and the lack of basic support and income to help him through this particular, hopefully short episode in his life due to mental health is going to have long-term impacts on his life. And so I think it's the right thing to do. It's dignified to give people an adequate income who have permanent long-term disabilities so that people can have choice. We talked about a gendered lens here. When people have choice, when money is in their name, they can choose and seek out safe, adequate housing that suits their needs. And it will ensure that we not only help people to move out of homelessness, but prevent others like my friend from moving into there.
Well, thank you. And, I was watching the news, I believe it was a few days ago, and I think they were talking about Bill C-22, and someone used the word lifesaver in many ways. And, when you talk about, choice and dignity, recovery and independence and real choices, it just says to me as a parliamentarian that we have to, ensure that this is not a nonpartisan issue with a nonpartisan approach, and that we work together on this committee to get it done as quickly as possible, and support that framework that the minister believes can take us there quickest. So I just want to say thank you for your time, for being here today, and for the work both of your organizations and you do individually. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Coteau. Madame Chabot pour 2 minutes et demie.
Ms. Chabot for 2.5 minutes. Thank you, says Ms. Chabot. I will continue with the theme of needing to act quickly, the call on parliamentarians to adopt this bill as quickly as possible. We hear you and we understand it, because what we want here is what we see in the title of the bill, that is reduce poverty and support the financial security of persons with disabilities by establishing the disability benefit. At the same time, this is a framework bill, piece of legislation, where we talk about having adequate supports, that there not be clawbacks, that none of that is in the bill. As parliamentarians, it's a blank slate. And what you're saying is regulations would help. We asked the minister how long this would take. We have had no indications. All of that to say how important it is that the regulations be developed with all the organizations representing persons with disabilities, even though that will lead to delays. Do you think there's a time frame that could be quite tight, within which we could act still?
Well, I would say in my comments, I indicated 6 months. I recall one of the other parliamentarians indicated 12 months, and either one would be fine. And I think it would be almost impossible to consult with quote unquote all organizations, because as you indicated, it is important to relieve poverty for those with disabilities and to get the act and regulations in place. But I think particularly based on the work that this committee does, and I've been involved with in the past, you're able to get a very good cross-section to start the process well. And with the committee that the minister will strike, I believe that we'll be in a good position relatively quickly to have a bill with regulations that will make a huge and life-changing difference in the lives of those with disabilities.
Merci, Madame Chabot. Madame Zerillo for 2.5 minutes to conclude the first hour.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. I just wanted to revisit just this idea of the necessities of life, because what we did hear around testimony, so Mr. Gladstone, I'll ask you to answer first, and then Mr. Nevin, what we heard in some testimony was that it costs more to have a disability, that it costs more than the average necessities of life, even on our Poverty Reduction Act, that we talk about a poverty level or a poverty line. Mr. Nevin, you talked about $1,000 gap just in housing alone. Mr. Gladstone, do you have any suggestions around what that financial security needs to look like in the way of a minimum benefit and what kind of things it needs to cover?
Well, I can only speak to Ontario, and I will take the number from Mr. Nevin because it's about the number that I would use as well as the $1,000. But the extra expenses are large. Never mind the supports that are generally provided by government. There's the extra supplies from everyday living, from clothing that is more expensive, from diapers to the extreme, obviously not everybody, but some, and the wheelchairs, for mobility challenged, it's all expensive. Some is covered, some is not at various levels. The increase is absolutely needed, and I think if for Ontario we're in a position to get an extra $1,000 a month, I think that would be life-changing and life-altering. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Nevin, do you have any comments?
I would just concur with Mr. Gladstone that assistive devices are expensive, as well as the additional limitations around transportation. I mean, that you're not going to those big box stores out in the suburbs to get those low cost items. And so the provision of food is expensive. It's hard to come by, that we're hearing from many folks, if you particularly have limited means to transportation or have mobility challenges. And so those are certainly some things to consider.
All right, thank you. And just my last point, I've got a couple of minutes, maybe, or a minute on eligibility.
Seconds.
Do you have, okay, Mr. Nevin, do you have any comments on eligibility and who should be included on the eligibility side? And Mr. Gladstone, if there's any time, or maybe you could send in a written.
Yeah, again, very pragmatically, want to expedite this and see that it happens quickly. And so if there's a way in the regulations to work with the provinces to extend provincial disability programs to might be the quickest way to implement this. However, there's some challenges there too, that for folks who might be disqualified from those programs for some reason, that may need to be included in the federal program.
I would concur and mention that the federal government currently has programs like the disability tax credit, that the provincial governments have, in Ontario's case, ODSP, that to Mr. Nevin's comment, those could be used with the ability to appeal if one is not eligible for one for whatever reason, that the eligibility still be there. And in terms of the cost, I'll just mention one ridiculousness living in York Region and sometimes having to go to Toronto and knowing back and forth as soon as you cross Steeles, although each municipality has a wonderful transit service for those with disabilities. As soon as you cross the line, you have to take a taxi and up goes the cost. And if you did not have a disability, you would not have that issue.
Thank you, Madame Zarillo. And thank you to the witnesses. We'll suspend for 2 minutes while we change the panels. And again, thank you, witnesses, for your time and testimony before this committee on this important bill. Merci beaucoup. to an act to reduce poverty and to support the financial security of persons with disabilities by establishing the Canada Disability Benefit and making a consequential amendment to the Income Tax Act. To assist the interpreters in their work, I kindly remind all members and witnesses appearing today to introduce themselves when speaking and to speak slowly. Nobody did that in the first round. I would like to take a few make a few comments for the benefit of the witnesses. You may speak in the official language of your choice. Interpretation services are available. For the meeting, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen if you're appearing virtually of either Floor, English, or French. Please wait until I recognize you before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. And I just want to emphasize we are doing interpretation in sign language as well. I would like to welcome our witnesses to begin our discussion with opening. But before I do, I forgot to acknowledge and recognize Shelley Cramp-Newman joined us this afternoon. But you joined us this afternoon. And Mr. Morris is joined us as well. So from the Easter Seals, Ontario, Alison Morse, Senior Manager, Advocacy and Family Engagement. Quebec Intellectual Disability Society, Emilia Durlanlo, Executive Director. Samuel Rago, Senior Policy Analyst and Advocacy Supervisor. From the Women's Legal Education and Action Fund, Jane Gumud. Did I get that right, Ms. Gumud? Communications and Advocacy Manager. We will start with Ms. Morris for 5 minutes, please. Ms. Morris.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak here today. I do go a little bit fast, but I'll try really hard to work on the pacing. So I've been involved with the Easter Seals for well over 30 years. I am the parent of a young person who was supported, and I have lived experience of the ways that young people fall into poverty. But what I've come here today is with the message around the families of children with disabilities thought they would be part of this disability benefit. Because it says persons with disabilities, there was an expectation that it might be broader than it currently is. And so one of the things that I would look for is to see whether in the preamble, we can start to talk about this may be the first stage in terms of supporting people with disabilities. When I represent families, they come from a place of fear at the very beginning as their child is diagnosed, and they learn to advocate for their child in the education system and in the healthcare system. And so these parents are faced on a daily basis with the challenge of coming up with the money to pay for the equipments and programs that their child may need. Easter Seals Ontario tries to fill that gap. With money raised by donors, we assist families with the cost of equipment. Now, even with the contribution we make, there still can be a gap that the parents can't fill. Some parents will take on additional debt to cover that, and many other families will do without. The cost of equipment for somebody with a physical disability can be astronomical. We're talking about $40,000 for a power wheelchair. There is some government funding, but they are very much at the base model. Recently, we've seen some young people that we're supporting that have gone to the wheelchairs that allow them to go from sit to stand. And the self-confidence and growth that you see when they have access to that kind of equipment. But what Easter Seals funds is basic equipment, particularly bathroom equipment, which is not covered by the Government of Ontario, and accessibility equipment to enable a child to get in and out of their home and around their home, whether this be lifts or ramps. So we fill in that gap. And that means that these families do not have enough money to buy equipment. And so they have to come knocking at the door of charities. Charities do a wonderful job of filling the gap across the social service sector. But as a parent, it's hard to know that you can't manage to support your child and you have to go knocking at doors and begging to get extra money. So one of the additional challenges faced by families is the fear for the future. So we're very excited about this bill and the fact that it is going to support working aged individuals or persons with disability, because we know that that's one of the family's biggest fears, that there will not be enough money to support them when they get to adulthood. For some of the kids that we support at Easter Seals, they have a rosy future. They may be going on to post-secondary. They have career prospects. But for the majority, it's going to be either a piecemeal of part-time jobs, periods of under and unemployment. In addition, there's those with very severe disabilities that are not going to be able to take part in work, but are looking for full participation in the community. All of these kids want to be fully included. And when their income is 40% below the poverty line here in Ontario, it's very, very challenging to get the things that make life worthwhile. I think on the earlier speakers, they were really talking about having to make choices and add your name to the list for affordable housing. And as it has already been indicated in the previous panel, that can be a wait of many years. In some places, it's 20 years, and you have aging parents that are still having to support their child because there is not enough money for the individual child to manage. So I'm here to talk about that, those fears, and to advocate for consideration of a long-term plan to expand the Canada Disability Benefit to include all people with disabilities, including those that are under the age of 18 and potentially over the age of 65. Do I have any more time?
You have 20 seconds, Ms. Morse. You may want to cover those items when you're answering some of the questions.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Now to who is speaking for the Quebec Intellectual Disability Society? Madame Duranlo? Oui. You have the floor.
Mesdames, Messieurs. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chair. First, thank you for your invitation. My name is Amélie Duranlo. I'm the Executive Director of the Quebec Intellectual Disability Society. I am here with my colleague Samuel Rago, who is a public policy analyst at the Society and a doctoral student at McGill University School of Social Work, working on questions of financial security for persons with disabilities. We are pleased to be here to share our thoughts on Bill C-22. First, we must emphasize that we are very much in favor of the swift passing of Bill C-22. This bill is something that we haven't seen in a decade. Of course, we are aware that legislators may find voting on a foundational bill which contains few details uncomfortable. However, we believe that this is the right thing to do. On the one hand, consultations with the disability community are still ongoing and will provide key information and expertise. On the other hand, and also, we have had successful experience in developing regulations in relation to a framework legislation in the context of the Basic Income Program in Quebec. This too is a framework legislation. And in the end, we worked with the provincial government for nearly 4 years to come up with a set of bylaws and regulations that were satisfactory to all parties involved. That is a timeline that they had set and that we respected. We believe that it will take less time in this case because many consultations are already underway with the provinces and territories, and the work has already begun. It is therefore possible to achieve success when we work together towards common good. And we are confident that this approach is also achievable for the Canadian benefit. Hello, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I would now like to address the importance of working with the provinces and territories. As you know, the provinces and territories all have financial assistance programs for persons with disabilities. It is therefore crucial that the federal government works with provincial and territorial governments to avoid penalizing beneficiaries and to avoid disengagement of local governments in the social protection and financial security of persons with disabilities. In Quebec, as of January 1st, 2023, we will have a basic income program, a first in Canada and probably in the world. While this program is not perfect and we continue to advocate with the provincial government, we must protect it and ensure that the Canadian benefit interacts in a positive and consistent way with it, and that it doesn't go against what the provinces and territories are trying to do, and that it truly help those who need it. We are pleased so far with the approach that was taken. I just talked to members of the cabinet in Quebec yesterday, and they were telling us that they would see it positively to have something that would complement at the federal level what they're doing at the provincial level. We're sure that this kind of negotiations are very possible. We've seen other such negotiations that have been successful. In addition to working with the provinces and territories, we think it is equally important that the Canada Disability Benefit be fully individualized, that it should not take into account the income of spouses in order to limit the issues of financial dependency, and that it should provide a real way out of poverty, and that it should allow people to work without any clawbacks. It is a matter of dignity, as we see it. As you may know, the current programs, welfare programs, are mostly punitive. They're really aimed at maintaining the minimal well-being, and we have to really avoid the welfarization of disability and what has been described as such. All these are fundamental but very technical elements that should be discussed in the regulatory process to develop the details of the benefits design. Thank you, Samuel. Indeed, in our opinion, it is adequate to set the parameters of the Act through a process of consultation and work with the community. The involvement of persons with disabilities, experts, and governments will be crucial. Thus far, we have seen encouraging signs from the government in this regard. Finally, rest assured that we will be ready to participate in this process. We will be more than happy to share our extensive experience in Quebec on these issues with all of you. Once again, thank you, and above all, thank you for moving forward with this very important bill. This is an opportunity that should not be missed. Too many depend on it. People depend on it. Thank you.
Duranlo. Miss Gumma, for 5 minutes, please.
Good evening, committee members, and thank you for inviting me here today. My name is Jen Gummad, and I'm the Communications and Advocacy Manager at the Women's Legal and Education and Action Fund, LEAF for short. I'm grateful to be calling in from Tikaronto, known as Toronto. This land is governed by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant. LEAF is a national charity that works towards ensuring the law guarantees substantive equality for all women, girls, trans, and non-binary people in Canada. LEAF is here today as an allied organization to disabled communities and organizations that advocate for them. Disability justice is gender justice. Our struggles cannot be separated. And we recognize it is because of the tireless advocacy of these communities that this bill exists in the first place. I'd also like to thank Dr. Sally A. Kimpson, disability scholar and advocate, who authored LEAF's report, Basic Income, Gender, and Disability. LEAF's brief, which we have submitted to the committee, and our position are based on her work. It is our position that Bill C-22 must be passed as quickly as possible. Disabled women, trans, and non-binary people are among the poorest people in Canada, and they cannot afford to wait any longer. Make no mistake, disability poverty is gendered. Reports show that as high as 1 in 3 women with disabilities lives in poverty. On average, they make less than disabled men and non-disabled women. Disabled women who are single parents, Indigenous, racialized, working class, and or newcomers live in the deepest poverty. Safety is an often overlooked basic need that is threatened by both ableism and poverty. Disabled women are twice as likely as non-disabled women to be subjected to violence. They are subjected to a wider range and subtler forms of violence, such as caregiver neglect. For those financially dependent on their family, spouse, or caregiver, which may often be the case, it may be impossible to leave a violent or abusive situation. Disability poverty is a vicious structural cycle that contributes to their substantive inequality. Without financial security, disabled women and trans people are deprived of and further excluded from a range of cultural, economic, educational, political, and social activities and exposed to more violence. Poverty takes away choice, and it is policy failures that create and exacerbate such conditions. I'll touch on existing disability supports in Canada and how they fail to meet the needs of disabled women and trans people. Disabled women are 3 times more likely to rely on government transfers than their non-disabled counterparts, and more likely than disabled men. However, this country's current provision of supports keeps women, trans, and non-binary people poor. For example, the largest source of income for low-income working-age disabled women in Canada is from government transfers, mostly provincial or territorial disability benefits, which make up over 3/4 of their total income on average. Yet all provincial and territorial support amounts are set far below the market basket measure for their region. And that's not even accounting for the extraordinary costs of being disabled. Dr. Kimpson accurately described Canada's current range of disability supports as, quote, a fragmented and uncoordinated patchwork of supports, end quote, with differing eligibility criteria, amounts, and types of benefits and definitions of disability. Many find the process of accessing existing supports confusing, which can discourage folks from applying at all. The Canada Disability Benefit, if designed and implemented correctly, provides an opportunity to reach more people who need it, to be less stringent and complicated to apply for than existing benefits, and to actually lift disabled people out of poverty. So how do we get there? The cost of living is skyrocketing and disability supports continue to stagnate. We cannot delay action any longer. LEAF urges this government to 1, pass Bill C-22 without delay, and 2, ensure that disabled communities lead the design, implementation, and evaluation of the benefit. We amplify the demands of disability rights organizations such as Disability Without Poverty and say that what matters most here is that we get the CDB rolled out as soon as possible and that it's done in collaboration and co-development with disabled people and disabled women who have the expertise to ensure people don't fall through the cracks. Such a benefit would be dignity enhancing. It would promote autonomy. It would reduce the substantive inequality that disabled women and trans people face. And most of all, it would give them more choice in how they want to live their lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gamad. We'll begin with 6 minutes to Ms. Ferry. Ferry?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much to our witnesses. I'm very fortunate to have worked with Easter Seals over my career and have lots of personal connections to people living with intellectual disabilities as well. I've been able to work with them throughout my career, so I know how important the work you guys are doing, as well as Jen from LEAF. So thank you for what you're doing. I think I really want to use this 6 minutes as efficiently as we can. I think we all know that this needs to get passed. We all know there's a crisis. And so I want to dig into the amendments. What things do we need to fix? I know we want to pass it quickly, but when we look at the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act Alliance, or AODA, and they watched our committee on Tuesday, they were concerned. And I guess what I would ask, I'm going to go to, if I can, is it Amelia? Amelia? Sorry, there's translation. So one of the concerns is that Minister Qualtrough tried to defend the federal government's choice to enact what they call framework legislation that leaves it out to future regulations to sort out all the details. And it goes on to say what this boils down to is the government does not want to debate and publicly vote in Parliament on any specifics about the Canada Disability Benefit. What would you recommend? Because we do want to move it quickly. We do want to make sure it's done properly so that the people who are impacted most, what amendments would you recommend for C-22 right now?
That's an excellent question. Sorry, there's always a little delay with interpretation. In terms of time frame, we do think that there's a constructive process going on right now that could continue. what our predecessors said on the previous panel about a dozen months could be realistic. There are some, but it will exacerbate some inequalities that are currently there. So maybe a year, we think that could be doable as long as there's enough time to discuss this with the provinces and territories. What we want to ensure is that the money really goes to the people who need it, and that the program complements what is available currently.
I think that's good feedback in making sure that that's written into the bill. To Allison of Easter Seals, I couldn't agree more with you about supporting families. So powerful, Allison, when you speak about this, because if the families aren't supported, the person living with the disability will not be successful as well. So you have hit a very big nail on the head. We had a letter that was sent in to us, to the committee, and I was asking the clerk to make sure that I was allowed to use her name, but she's written in multiple times, and her name is Megan. And Megan writes in, she's an autistic Canadian living in Sudbury, Ontario, and she has a lot of concerns. And one of the big concerns, it says, will the bill consider anyone working, or is it going to discriminate based on age? If so, that's not okay and will leave thousands of Canadians left out. Allison, you know, as a mom of somebody living with a disability, you know that working age is different for somebody with a disability. How do you feel about Megan's concerns, and what do you think needs to be changed in the bill to ensure the safeguards are there to make sure it's executed properly?
Thank you very much for allowing me to comment. In terms of amendments, right now this says it's a Canada Disability Benefit, and then in the small print it says for working age Canadians. So I think that we need to be thinking bigger in terms of who's going to be included in this Canada Disability Benefit, and then work on each sector separately. The working age is probably the group that jumps to mind, because there is an expectation that families can take care of their kids. But the experiences that I've had and seen amongst the parents supported by Easter Seals is a major struggle. So I would like to see an amendment that acknowledges that people with disabilities are of all ages. I think in further that as we start to get to the regulations, that there needs to be lots of input on those, and to see whether there is a way to really look at the lifelong disability. So when you're diagnosed as a baby or a preschooler with a disability that is going to affect you permanently for the rest of your life, that there's a way to provide the Canada Disability Benefit to that person. I realize that that's not what the thinking was in terms of the early stages of this, but I think it's an important direction to recognize and work towards. In terms of other amendments, families are very concerned about the process to apply. We need to have it so that it's user-friendly, that it is not complicated, that there is people to assist them with the process, and that there is an appeal or a dispute resolution mechanism to allow families and other people with disabilities to have an appeal to find out why they were denied or why their benefit was potentially reduced. So I think those would be some important amendments to consider.
Those are excellent amendments, and I hope this committee puts those forth. In back to Megan's letter, who I was referring to earlier, she touched on exactly what you've just suggested, Allison, and one of the things she said in her letter to the committee was, is the government going to allow doctors to bill this to their individual provinces so that Canadians can get them filled out for free? What is the cost going to be associated with this? And I think you've hit a nail on the head of navigating the system, which is a problem we see over and over again with a lot of programs. The intention is good. That's great. But where is the execution in terms of making sure that it is accessible and easy to navigate? Because sometimes this is hard for somebody who doesn't have an intellectual disability. This is sometimes a big challenge for somebody who doesn't have that. So this is another barrier put in place if we don't get this right in the bill. So I really appreciate you bringing that up.
Ms. Frary, we're well over your time, but important issues. And now to Mr. Van Bynen for 6 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Happy to see that the Ontario Easter Seal Society is with us today. I've been engaged with the Easter Seal Society for almost 30 years, mostly through the Persicini Easter Seal Run Walkathon. And we've been able to raise in the range of about $3 million to support Easter Seal kids in Ontario. But it shouldn't have to be that way. And I think that's what's so important about what we're considering today in terms of providing support. What I've heard is there are a number of very complicated dynamics that need to be considered as we go forward. The availability of housing, how this fits with, I heard testimony, how does this fit with the National Housing Strategy? How does this provide a basic income? There are additional needs beyond the basic income, and that is support programs as far as personal support workers, equipment, etc. And so I think it's really important that we actively engage the disabled community in developing the program, the mechanisms, the applications, the appeal processes. So my first question then is to the Easter Seal Society. I know that Ontario has different regulations than any other province, some of which I think are disappointing and include a clawback. So how would an organization such as yourself be engaged in helping develop the program through these regulations on a provincial basis?
Easter Seals Ontario will be very pleased to be engaged in those discussions. We would like to have our voice at the table so that we can think about the children, but and in addition, the futures they face. Futures that may be limited by poverty. So I think it's really important to be able to talk about that and be at the table. Easter Seals will be very pleased to do that. And not just as people as a staff, but we have a number of effective parents that would like the opportunity to participate in the process, as well as some young adults with lived experience that would really like to talk about it. So I think we could contribute both the voices that need to be considered, but also some of the ideas that need to be shared.
Mm-hmm. Is there, or are you aware of provincial organizations that would be able to provide province-specific inputs that need to be considered as we develop these regulations?
Well, the problem is when you're talking about the disability community, it's a really wide range of people and disabilities. There are lots of aspects to it. We've been listening to presenters about gender. We've been hearing about the challenges of housing. So I think it would more need to be a coalition of groups that can speak to various aspects, and then for that group to assist with the discussions at the provincial level, because you're right, it will vary province to province.
The other concern that I have is how do we recognize the unpaid supports that families are providing that is not covered? First, to recognize that it's going on and how important that is. But my concern then is if these children, or if the parents pass on, how are we going to provide for these children that have had these supports without any cost to the government?
I would say it's a major issue. Aging parents are very, very concerned. You might be concerned when your child's 15, but by the time your child is 45 or 50, you're definitely alarmed, especially if you're the major person providing the care. So one of the things is we really need to be talking about long-term planning and helping the families to access a variety of resources so that their child is ready to leave the home well before the parent is incapacitated and no longer able to provide them with care. But we've talked about providing a Canada Disability benefit to individuals, but it has to be part of a broader strategy to improve the services and supports that are available to people with disabilities. That includes help with the cost of equipment, but also the cost of programming and including personal care support workers that are needed by many, many individuals with a disability.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned earlier, and I just want, if you don't mind, remind me the cost of a wheelchair, the accessibility, and the bathrooms, having to modify the bathrooms for a family. What would you say the costs for that would be?
Well, I mentioned the cost. of a wheelchair. So a power wheelchair can be up to $40,000. A manual wheelchair can cost as much as $15,000. And we're not just talking about a plain wheelchair that's just off the shop floor. These are customized wheelchairs where they have the appropriate headrests, they have the appropriate lumbar support. They may have additional features that support the movement of the arms or the legs or stabilize them. A bath lift to put in to enable a parent to move their child from their wheelchair into the bath is $2,300 to $4,000. A ramp into the house can be $8,000. A van lift to get your child into an accessible van can cost as much as $35,000. And that's in addition to the cost of that vehicle that can be modified to include the van lift. A simple shower or commode chair, the chair you put the child in to be safe when they are being bathed in the shower, that needs to be able to support their trunk, their head, make sure that they are safe while they're being bathed. One of the things that we're seeing increasing numbers of devices prescribed is standers. And a stander puts a child in the upright position. And this mimics the way that when the rest of us stand, and it has huge positive potential in terms of supporting the child to weight bear through their bones, which strengthens their bones. It also puts their muscles in a different position, can reduce contractures, and most excitingly, can put the child face to face with their peers.
So, thank you, Ms. Morris and Mr. Van Buinen. Your time is it. Madame Chabot pour 6 minutes.
Ms. Chabot for 6 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much to our witnesses, and I'd like to particularly send my regards to the Quebec Intellectual Disability Society. Thank you for agreeing to appear in Quebec. Your society is very much representative and represents those with intellectual disabilities. There's not that much time for questions, but there are a few. For example, first, hearing that the basic income program is coming into force in Quebec on January 1st of 2023, that's amazing, and a lot of work was done. You mentioned something that was important. You talked about individualized benefits. You said it was something that was very basic in terms of what would be needed in Canada. So 2 questions on that. Why is it that important? Could you explain that? And would it be an important principle to include in the preamble of the bill? Thank you. Well, the individualizations of the benefits is fundamental. This is a very basic condition to make sure that the benefits actually work. Many people have talked about that today, especially for women with disabilities. They are much more likely to live and be in financial dependency and be abused. That's something we want to avoid. And that is something we are starting to fix in Quebec. And in terms of the federal benefit, there would be a way to find ways to fix that right now, whether it's in the preamble or in the regulations. It's something that is quite necessary. Absolutely. Question. I was talking about one of my concerns, and you can tell me if it's one of your concerns as well. Many other witnesses mentioned it as well. It's a concern of the minister and of the government as well, but that is that this benefit complement what is provided by the provinces. Right now, we have a framework legislation where it's going to be all in the regulations that we're going to set the details. We know there are as many programs as there are provinces and territories. Working in our own province of Quebec is not the same as working in various areas of the country with various programs. how would you prevent the temptation of some provinces or territories to cut their own benefits? Yes, that's one of our Yes, that's one of our concerns. Yes, we're going to have to make sure that care or benefits isn't privatized, or that there are no clawbacks based on what the federal government provides. That is one of our concerns. The negotiations we saw in various situations, for example, daycares and childcare, have led to results. So there is an opening to negotiating that. There's also a way to talk informally with cabinet members, shall we say. So that's something that is important, and there is a way to work together and move forward, and that's something that's important for everybody to move forward without making it an issue of wedge politics. If I may add to that, it should not be to the detriment of public services and access for all. So complementarity has to be seen that way as well. Question. Yes, so it's the model for childcare that has existed in Quebec for 25 years that was used as a basis for the next program. So that's a comment. Regarding this bill, it's a bit uncomfortable for parliamentarians, where we have to set basic amounts and eligibility criteria to set conditions for and by persons with disabilities. That's what we've heard. But if we're going to ask questions of a minister, it's going to take at least 3 hours. Are there still parameters, amendments that you could suggest? You can submit them later if you don't have anything right now, but something that we could look for or suggest to put in place to help direct discussions, especially on something that there's already consensus on, I would say. Answer. I would say that the one amendment to make would be when this benefit would kick in. That would be the most important one, for a very simple reason. I'm a member of a panel of experts, or a group of experts, really looking at some of this kind of issue. It's a group of experts, we have lots of discussions, we get into the details, and we haven't come to an agreement on this. I mean, some of the details are sometimes technical and so on, and some of these details are easier to hammer out during longer consultations. Thank you.
Madame Zerillo, for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm going to actually ask Ms. Gamad about some of the work that was done on basic income. Before I do, I wonder if I could just ask, and I'm sorry, I don't have the witness on my screen. So Ms. Duranlo, if I could just ask, when the basic income happened, you mentioned that there was 4 years to make regulations. Was there a starting point? Was there a previous agreement on what the amount should be, or where they should, what the eligibility should be, and what the timelines would be? You mentioned there was something around timelines. Was there pre-determined consensus on eligibility and amount before you started the conversation on basic income in Quebec?
Answer. Thank you for this question. The question was to me, but I'll let my colleague Samuel answer because he was there at the very beginning, so he knows the background. Next witness. Yes, there were details included in an action plan for that, for reducing poverty, and the basic income program is really aimed at people who have serious constraints to their ability to work and for a long time, for social solidarity, as we call it. So it's a very limited program. It's not that easy to access it, but it's a good program for the rest. So yes, there were some starting points, But what we can see is that the federal government's consultations also is bringing us to this kind of starting point, the consultations that were led by large organizations such as Inclusion Canada. So we can also already get an idea of what that starting point would be.
Thank you. So Ms. Gamad, you had mentioned about the gender lens and diverse genders, trans persons with disabilities. And I mean, this is often a voice that is not involved in the making of legislation, that is not in the decision-making tables. So I also note that LEAF is doing some work around basic income. So I wonder if you've got any best practices or things you can share with us about how we can get those voices included. Right now in this Bill C-22, it doesn't necessarily regulate or ensure that those voices will be part of the co-creation. And I'm just wondering how we could ensure as legislators here that those voices are included in making of regulations and to make sure that that voice is not missed.
Thank you for your question. I would say I would point back to my earlier comment about those among disabled women who live in the deepest poverty. There's many reports, there's lots of data showing who is the most marginalized, who lives in the deepest poverty among this group, and really put them at the forefront in leading this co-development process.
All right. I'm hearing from all of the witnesses today on urgency. Hopefully it won't take 4 years to get regulation going, but I mean, has there been conversations in your organizations? I'll ask Ms. Morse and then maybe Ms. Gamad. Have there been conversations about an interim benefit that could help folks now that the rising cost of rents, the rising cost of food, that could make sure that there's some security in the community while these regulations are being made?
Thank you very much for the opportunity to respond. We haven't had those discussions because of the thought that families and children with disabilities are being excluded from this legislation. But I think the prospect of making an interim payment while you develop the system would be ideal, because we know right now that there are a lot of people that are really struggling, and that if they don't get help, as we heard earlier, they could end up with homelessness, or they'll be needing more healthcare services, whether it's for their physical or mental health. So in terms of the interim benefit, I think that might be a good way to start. But part of the issue is that Canada is a very big country, and that what you can get for your dollar will vary from community to community and from province to province. And so some of that individualization that was really spoken about for the individual client, I think it may have to be some sort of individualization on a provincial basis as to how the benefit interconnects with their existing programs. Not to say that any province would get more or less, but that there is consideration of the uniqueness of each of those autonomous organizations.
Great. Probably just enough time for Ms. Gamad to finish.
Yes, we hadn't considered an interim benefit, but the urgency is there. The need is there for sure. The only thing I would caution against is getting stuck on this interim benefit and the CDB being delayed any further or not rolled out at all.
Ms. Cirillo?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Is it you concluding?
Yes, thank you so much to the witnesses today.
Okay. Ms. Gray, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank all of the witnesses for being here today. Before I get to my questions, I would like to move a motion that I have on notice and go through this quickly so that we can get back to our important witnesses right away. That pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee invite the Minister of Housing and Diversity and Inclusion and relevant officials to appear before the committee for no less than 2 hours regarding the federal funding provided to the Community Media Advocacy Centre by the Government of Canada and the officials' handling of the situation, that the meeting be televised, and that the meeting take place no later than November 10th, 2022. And just a couple of points to clarify, this would be during our constituency week next week, where we have no meeting scheduled, so it would not take away from any of the work that this committee is doing. I'll note as well that during the Heritage Committee meeting testimony on October 21st regarding the grant given to the CMAC, Minister Rodriguez had said, quote, Minister Hussen is totally responsible for this program, unquote. And we have new information that we need answers to, and we need to hear from Minister Hussen quickly, given Leif Marouf's anti-Semitism and anti-French views. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Gray. On the powers, this standing committee's powers come from Standing Order 108.1, which states the following, and I'm bound by the standing orders of the House to the committee, and they state that standing committees shall be severally empowered to examine and inquire into all such matters as may be referred to them by the House. Standing Order 108.2 further states that standing committees are also empowered to study and report on all matters relating to the mandate, management, and operation of the department or departments of government which are assigned to them from time to time by the House. Specifically, as part of its mandate, the Standing Committee on Human Resources, Skills, and Social Development and the Status of Persons with Disabilities can study and report on the legislation, expenditure plans, program and policy objectives, and the mandate, management, and operation of Employment and Social Development Canada. While the motion seeks to invite the Minister of Housing and Diversity and Inclusion and relevant officials to appear before this committee regarding the federal funding provided to the Community Media Advocacy Centre, the Department of Canadian Heritage funded the Community Media Advocacy Centre. It is also my understanding the Standing Committee, as you indicate, on Canadian Heritage held a briefing to discuss the department's contract with the Community Media Advocacy Centre on Friday, October the 7th, 2022. While the Minister's responsibilities include diversity and inclusion, the motion is outside of the mandate of the committee, as outlined in Standing Order 108, to study and report on the matters related to management and operations of the departments, agencies, and Crown corporations for which it is assigned, and it is therefore out of order. Madam Gray, no debate. My decision has been made. Ms. Gray, you can challenge my decision.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to challenge your decision. Minister Hussen does report to this committee.
And that was outlined, but the department is not assigned to the committee, and it was funded by another department. I've made my ruling, and Ms. Gray, you've challenged. Everybody has heard the order, the committee, as I indicated, and the ruling I made is in line with Standing Order 108.2 of the House of Commons Committee. I must respect the orders given to this committee by the House of Commons, which are unanimously passed to this committee. Based on that, your motion is out of order. Clerk, call a vote on the chair's ruling so that we're clearly outlined to committee members.
The question is, shall the decision of the chair be sustained? If you're in agreement, you vote yes. If you're in disagreement, vote no. Mr. Long.
Yes.
Madame Martinez Ferrara.
Oui.
Mr. Collins.
Yes.
Mr. Coteau.
Yes.
Mr. Van Bynen.
Yes.
Ms. Gray.
No.
Mr. Aitchison.
No.
Ms. Cramp Newman.
No.
Ms. Ferrari.
No.
Madame Chabot.
Oui.
Ms. Cirillo.
No.
That's 6 yeas, 5 nays.
The chair's ruling is upheld. We have 2 minutes left of the committee's timeline. Do we have unanimous consent to proceed to a question, or does the committee wish to adjourn? What is? Oh, before, sorry, in the minute we have left, before the wishes of the committee, we only got 2 minutes, but before we do, if we move to adjourn, to extend, we need unanimous consent. I would like to get the budget approved for this study that is currently ongoing. All members of the committee were provided that the budget. Do I have approval of the budget to do the study? Every committee member has it. Agree? Ms. Gray, I'm getting unanimous. It's 29,775. Do we have agreement? I see unanimous consent. Yeah. Yeah, Mr. Aitchison.
Can I? It's a process question, but I'm wondering why we start a study before we actually have a budget. Usually, like in my world, we have a budget before we start, and I've seen us like approve budgets around this place like after the study's over. How does that work? Why does it work that way?
We often get the witness names during the course of it, and so we amalgamate all the witness names, figure out the regions they are in, but quite often the committee starts a study while we're still amalgamating the witness names, and then it takes time to prepare. We prepare as quickly as possible, but it's really dependent upon when we receive the witness names.
Good question. It's still a weak system, but okay.
So what's the direction of the committee? We are at our 2-hour timeline. Adjourn. The consensus of the committee is to adjourn. Committee is adjourned. Thank you, witnesses, for appearing today. Important study.